Yesterday, we did a bunch of streaming. Obviously, you can go back. We have 2 segments that cover, I would say, about 90% of the hearings yesterday. And any of the highlights from that we did not get to, we will touch upon today. But the main gist of it was the Democrats wanted to do 2 things yesterday. And I will give a little bit of an analysis in a bit as to what I think their strategy was about. But they wanted to do 2 things. It was quite clear. One is they wanted to communicate to some audiences that the U.S., the implications of what Donald Trump did were, the stakes were high in terms of our relationship and the importance of our relationship and U.S. foreign policy toward Ukraine. And largely, George Kent, a State Department official, delivered that message. He had other things to talk about, but that was the big part that he needed, that he was brought in, I think, why they had him on day one. And then it was Ambassador Bill Taylor, who was the U.S. diplomat to Ukraine. And he was brought in to basically say, over time, I realized there was a 2-track foreign policy with Ukraine. One, which represented U.S. foreign policy. The other, the irregular, he called them, that represented Donald Trump's personal interests. And I recognized when they started to diverge, these 2 tracks, and I came to understand what was going on. And he delivered that very well. The Republicans largely did not seem to be aware that this was going to happen yesterday. To the extent that they were successful at anything, I think they did make a case that Hunter Biden is a bit of a fail son and that we have a problem in this country with people trading off of their name and monetizing it, which I think is a fair assessment, largely irrelevant to the question of impeachment, but not so much if you're a Fox News viewer. And here's the point. Fox News, we got something similar to this, or this is Fox News Now. And they wanted, one of the things that was quite clear during the impeachment hearings, and it started very, very early, was you saw a lot of conservatives tweeting out, boring, very boring. And this was the line that was taken by the Republicans and the conservatives. This was their strategy from the beginning. Let's convince people not to watch it because it's boring. And after the fact, let's convince people that nobody watched it. It was irrelevant because it was boring. And here is Bill Bennett. They brought him on. I took him out of retirement. I don't know what Bill Bennett is doing now.
He's got a Fox Nation show.
Oh, he does? Okay,
Yeah.
well, there you go.
At Steve Wynn's casino, where they sit in a round table and just talk.
Oh, is that right?
Talk shop.
Well,
yeah.
Steve Wynn doesn't own that casino anymore. We sure that show's still on?
Maybe not with Steve Wynn. After.
Right. Well, I mean, the bottom line is now the reason why they brought Bennett on here was because Bill Bennett was a Republican sort of pillar, and he was at one point the Secretary of Education, I think, under one of the Bushes, and it was subsequently found that he had a massive gambling problem that reached into, I think, millions of dollars, and that he was also apparently going to Vegas to gamble and then hooking up with a dominatrix, and he was married, and so it was a little bit scandalous. If I remember, that was at least the alleged rumor about him with the dominatrix. And so they brought him on to talk about how, what it takes to make a scandal sexy. And here he is.
Americans are not buying the attacks on the president.
They're not buying the attacks and they're not interested. Look, this is a public event now, and there's no burglary, there's no break-in, there's no tapes, there's no dress, there's no sex, there's no Monica Lewinsky. Just interest just isn't there.
Yeah.
Plus, most important, there's no crime.
Okay. Now, I have two responses to this. One is that we are going to do most of our coverage with some background music that will jazz things up a little bit. Let's just play a little sample of it. Yeah, we're going to do that as we do some of the coverage because I think it was Reuters said there wasn't, or it was at NBC. Here it is, analysis. The first two witnesses called Wednesday to testify to President Trump's scheme, but lacked the pizzazz necessary to capture public attention. And we saw something similar, I think, with Reuters, like that had to do with pizzazz. So we're going to add some of that pizzazz. The other thing to remember here is that I don't know what the ratings were for that. I don't really know whether the American public was paying attention or not. There is one very narrow audience that the Democratic impeachment is targeted towards. I don't think there's anybody out there who genuinely believes that impeachment will move the needle in the context of the 2020 presidential election. I don't know that anyone has ever said that. I think had the Democrats not done this, I think they would have dampened their own enthusiasm. But I don't think there was anybody who ever said, if they impeach Donald Trump, he's going to lose support. I think there have been people who said, if you impeach Donald Trump, you could actually help Donald Trump. There's no evidence of either thing that's happening. His approval ratings have not moved. I guess it's conceivable they could drop a little bit if they make the case. And I guess it's conceivable that they could go up if the Democrats had handled this really poorly. And it's quite clear that they're not. The audience for this are in purple states, and they are going to be potential voters. And I say this over and over again. And I'm going to keep saying it because I for some reason, I don't see anybody else saying it. And I'm surprised by that, which is not to say that I don't appreciate my own profundity, but I'm surprised that no one has made this point. When you talk about the importance of U.S. foreign policy towards Ukraine, when you talk about Bill Taylor's service to the United States in the military and whatnot, and Kent's long service as a part of the diplomatic corps, and as someone who is nonpartisan, you might as well be talking to the voter that Susan Collins is trying to reach, or the voter that Cory Gardner is trying to reach, or the voter that Joni Ernst wants to reach, or Sally McAdams wants to reach, or Tom Tillis wants to reach. There may be even in Georgia. I mean, the playing field could expand. And the problem with that is not so much that you're looking to even convince those people. They may not even be paying attention. But in 6 to 8 months from now, when Susan Collins is trying to distance herself from Donald Trump, when Cory Gardner is trying to distance himself from Donald Trump, when Joni Ernst is trying to distance herself from Donald Trump. Remember, Joni Ernst even said there should be an examination of this. I'm following Grassley's lead here. They don't want to be hugged too tightly by Donald Trump. They also don't want to be crapped on by Donald Trump. And so what their plan was until any of this happened was to sort of toe that line and bob and weave and be non-committal. But there's nothing that can commit you more than voting for or against impeachment of this president. And when Susan Collins votes not to impeach Donald Trump and her opponent says, how could you vote to protect Donald Trump? His word versus the word of these distinguished people like Ambassador Taylor and, and George Kent. Guy wears a bow tie, for God's sakes. Susan Collins does not have the opportunity now to say that these people were their testimony was in any way compromised. She is in a box. And what happened yesterday was that box got even harder and more rigid and less escape proof. That is what the whole import from a political standpoint will be in 2020, in the 2020 elections. It will be, and some congressional races too, I imagine, but mostly from the Senate perspective. Like I say, there would have been implications, I think, if Democrats had not done this, because I think that would have depressed some of the support for Democrats, broadly speaking, and it would have left a vacuum where Donald Trump and Bill Barr would be creating a whole myth now about 2016 that is now automatically debunked, and we have people debunking that every day on our TV now in sworn testimony. And I think there was a ethical, civic responsibility to do this. But in terms of electoral politics, all of its meaning is going to be in the Senate races. And we will talk more about that in a moment and start to crank up the all that jazz music.